Let's bring in Mark Temnycky for more analysis on this. He's an expert in Eurasian affairs at the Atlantic Council. Mark, thanks for being with us. Volodymyr Zelenskiy, adamant that the missile wasn't Ukrainian. NATO basically saying likely that it was. Surely the truth will be easy to ascertain given the expertise that forensic analysis has these days.
Yes, and I think that now we have to be patient. I think it's very common that people try to have a hot take and publish what they want to, and unfortunately that leads to misinformation and disinformation. So exactly like you said, we need to wait for the experts and the analysts to realize what happened and then start drawing conclusions from there and the appropriate action afterwards.
Indeed, as the news is breaking, of course, we and everyone else stressing it's important to wait for the facts to emerge, and you're underlining that for us, and we get that completely. However, I think it's still fair to say, no matter how this turns out, where it comes from, whichever premise is the correct one, there are still questions for NATO, questions for Ukraine, questions for Russia on this one. So what does NATO do next?
I think that this shows the danger of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And as we approach the 9 months period, thousands of people have died, unfortunately, from this horrific accident. 2 Poles have died, and it just shows the magnitude of the conflict. I think that NATO has to continue providing weapons to Ukraine so that it can defend itself and defeat Russia. Otherwise, it's certainly possible that another mistake like this could happen, or worse. And the world does not want a global conflict. And I think the way that preventing that is to allow the Ukrainians to maintain their sovereignty and push the Russians out of their country.
So what Russia is trying to achieve by its 58 missiles that it fired at Ukraine yesterday, I think a record number, and certainly clear that that is an aggressive act. It's actually pushed it even more against Russia in that context, because Russia can't say, oh, well, that rocket wasn't ours. It fell on Polish soil. It wouldn't have happened if the Russian aggression wasn't happening.
Precisely. And this is an unnecessary war. It's an illegal war. Russia is invading the sovereignty of a foreign country, its neighbor, and Ukraine has every right to defend itself, like Secretary Stoltenberg said during the NATO presentation that you showed earlier today.
Okay,
Ukraine has every right to defend itself.
Indeed, Jens Stoltenberg saying that. We're hearing from the Pentagon, from the US, that the United States is basically going to stand with and continue with the military aid to Ukraine. How essential is that, especially from an air defense angle?
Oh, certainly. Today, there was an announcement that the Biden administration is working with Congress to push a new bill, roughly $40 billion in additional aid to Ukraine, so showing that the United States stands firmly with Ukraine. The European Union is working together to try to promote some sort of additional funding bill, but unfortunately there are some holdups. But it just shows that the entire international community is once again supporting Ukraine during this Russian act of aggression. The United Nations just had 2 votes this week condemning Russia on its invasion as well.
Indeed, the United Nations saying that. The G20, of course, Mark, underlining that too. Mark Temnycky of the Atlantic Council, expert on Eurasian affairs. Thank you, sir, very much for joining us here in France 24. We appreciate your time. We continue to look for all developments. Thank you, sir, once again. We continue to look for all developments, of course, on the situation in Ukraine.